Good Saturday afternoon, and welcome back to this week's edition of The Truth. I'm John Gordon. What a week. What a month. You know, I sat there during Joe Biden's 4 years, and I literally thought that I was watching a car crash. Have you ever been in an accident? Do you know the sensation that I'm talking about? You're in a fender bender or you're watching an accident. And as it's in progress, it seems to be moving in slow motion and then bam! And you think, if only there could have been a slight intervention, if only for the fraction of a second, we could have avoided this entirely. It happened to me just the other day. I was sitting in traffic a mile and a half from where I am right now, and I was on a side street. Traffic was snarled all over town. And so I was serpentining through side streets to get to main arteries to find one that was clear. I think Trump was either coming or going, actually, which is not a commentary on Trump coming and going. Frankly, it's a royal pain. I have been awakened at midnight by the helicopter hovering over my house, which is where it hovers when the president is coming or going. I have been awakened at 4 a.m., 5 a.m. when they're preparing for the president to usually leave at that hour of the day. I have been caught in traffic four or five times, maybe six. My wife seems to be caught in it more than I am. And it is a huge inconvenience. And I have friends that say, oh, I can't wait until Trump isn't president anymore so we don't have to endure this. My paradigm is the diametric opposite. It is a minor inconvenience for me so that he can govern. And the job that he is doing is nothing less than phenomenal. And I don't think that it matters whether you're a Republican or Democrat, whether you're Christian, Jew, Muslim, I guess that would be the Quran, I'm not sure, Hindu, agnostic, atheist, liberal, conservative, libertarian, independent, neutral. It just doesn't matter what your belief structure is. You have to believe that the things that he is doing are in your and my best interest. These are not partisan issues. It's spending money in Kakistan to lecture bureaucrats or journalists, if there is a difference, on how to use non-binary language in communications. I don't even know what that means. I literally do not know what that means. And frankly, I don't give a damn. And gender dysphoria education in foreign countries. And it's just too revolting for me to even talk about the money that has been spent through USAID and other seemingly well-intended organizations that have absolutely blown up in our face and has just constituted complete fraud, waste, and abuse. Yet Democrats want to criticize him. And I frankly don't get it. But anyway, I digress. During Biden's administration, it felt to me that we were in a 4-year train wreck that we knew was coming to a disastrous conclusion, and bam! But that moment that you hope for, that moment of intervention arrived. And we saw it repeatedly. We have seen it repeatedly through the growth, development, and evolution of the Trump administrations through 45 and 47. And in the campaign, we saw 4 fake trials that they drugged Trump through. We saw the persecution of Trump insiders. I'm thinking of Paul Manafort, Roger Stone, Rudy Giuliani, and Steve Bannon, to name a few, where they lock people in jail, strip their bar license away from them, ruin their reputations, drain their bank accounts. Peter Navarro, that's the other one I was trying to think of. These are real people with families who worked hard for decades, and they just ruined them because they could. But then Trump intervened. He went and faced his accusers in court. It was, in my view, heroic. It showed courage. Then in Butler, Pennsylvania, he literally took a bullet that missed his head by a fraction, literally by a hair. I don't know about you folks, but to me, you zoom out and look at it from afar, it feels to me that Trump is the chosen one. It feels almost, without being sacrilegious, near a second coming. It is spiritual for me, because as listeners of this program know that for years, 2 or 3 years, I would say that, but don't worry, God's got us. Don't worry, God is in charge. And I was borderline probably going to get in trouble with our Father and Savior, because I would say, and dear God, it's time for you to show up. Uh-oh. Please, God, forgive me. But I meant it. Not as disrespect for our Lord and Savior, but as for a statement of how dire our conditions were and how fragile our country was and how desperate I felt. I also a friend of mine said, well, you predicted doom and gloom on election day. You said they were going to declare martial law and suspend the elections. I did not predict that. I did raise it as a possibility. And I was frankly afraid of something of that magnitude, because they appeared so desperate and so demonic and so evil and so determined to get Trump. They had tried everything else. They had tried fake impeachments. They had tried fake trials. They had faked a lady who claimed to have been raped in Bergdorf Goodman 30 years ago, but could remember none of the circumstances surrounding it. And it was to have happened in a dressing room. Give me a break. Because I have been to those dressing rooms as a customer. I have tried on clothes in those dressing rooms, and there is a sheet. 30 years ago, there was a sheet separating you from everybody else outside the dressing room. A little curtain. There wasn't like the fancy dressing rooms you go in today where they have a doorknob and the lock on the door so you can leave your belongings in there as you go out to get fitted, and somebody's not going to jump in there and steal your money, which happened to me when I was a little kid. At JCPenney's, my mom took me there to buy some clothes, and I left my hard-earned money in my pocket, and I came back and it was gone. So I learned at an early age not to do that. Anyway, sometimes I get off track. But I'm just saying, the story did not hold up. None of the stories held up. And Trump beat them at every turn. A lesser man would have succumbed. But I put my faith in God, I think Trump put his faith in God and our rule of law that he would somehow muddle his way through it and come out victorious on the other side. And that's where we are today. There was not a seminal moment in the elections. There was a lot of shenanigans. We know that. But another thing, Trump said, make it too big to rig. And I was like, yeah, right. You're dreaming. How naive can you be? But it turned out he was right. We didn't know that 90,000 Amish people were going to turn out to vote in Pennsylvania, where traditionally only 3,000 showed up. That's an 87,000 improvement. You got to fake a lot of ballots to overcome that. And the turnout was spectacular all across the board. He won 7 swing states. We were trying to figure out how he could win 4 of them, maybe 3 of them to get it across the line. He won all 7. His theory, his plan worked. It was brilliantly executed. And as much as I admire and respect Donald Trump, it is my firm conclusion it was throughout aided, abetted, orchestrated, designed, and transacted through divine intervention. Call me crazy, that's what I believe. But Donald Trump did the work. He did the work, and he did it for us. So we lived through the train wreck. And then there was the intervention. And we saw Biden in action. We saw him on multiple occasions, eating ice cream, laying on the beach, and then the horrible debate when he appeared to be a deer in headlights. Somebody obviously had forgotten to give him his meds and pump him full of whatever it was that they gave him so that he could show up and perform. But we saw the real Joe Biden that night, and it was an awakening for the American people, and it showed that Donald Trump had been telling them the truth all along, and that the mainstream media had consistently lied to us, just like everybody in the Biden administration had lied to us. They said, oh, he's fine. He's bright and alert, fully competent, and he has the nuclear codes. In Joe we trust. BS. They lied to us. This cast of characters, Mayorkas, Garland, Ronroe, Director Cheadle, Director Ray, they just fed us lie after lie after lie. And then this week, we got to see Donald Trump and his cabinet in action. I've been a student of politics since I was 7 years old. I put on my first bumper sticker for Richard Nixon. I was proud of it then, and I remain proud of it today. He was a smart, patriotic, diligent American who was badly, badly mistreated. And I agree. I think Tucker Carlson is right. The CIA got Nixon just like they got Kennedy. And I'm starting to delve in, ladies and gentlemen. You've heard me talk about Kennedy for 3 years. I've got a new obsession. It's Ronald Reagan and John Hinckley. Roger Stone says, and he has the ring of truth, that 2 journalists, one of them was Andrea Mitchell, and the other, I can't remember, somebody like Andrea Mitchell. One was at NBC, the other was at CBS. In the immediate moments after Reagan's, the attempted assassination on Reagan, those journalists reported that there were 2 shooters at the Washington Hilton Hotel. One on the roof over the porte cochere, and the other on the street. That would have been John Hinckley. He also reports that a relative of John Hinckley was to have had dinner with George Bush that night in Washington. He's gotten my attention. I'm going to probe. I'm going to dig. I have developed a new intellectual curiosity, and I will share it with you. Just like I'm going to continue to bird dog Butler, Pennsylvania on July the 13th, 2024. There is no way, in my estimation, I've got a lot of circumstantial evidence. I don't have the smoking gun or the silver bullet or even the single bullet. Although that is a question of interest. Where are the bullets? Where is the forensic evidence? Where is the gun? I'd like to see an independent investigation of it. And I'd like the fingerprints lifted from that gun. There's a lot of work that can be done. I, in fact, wrote the district attorney from Butler County, Pennsylvania, in the days immediately following the attempted assassination and said to him, this was murder that occurred in your jurisdiction. Corey Compouture died in Butler, Pennsylvania. That is murder. The people that did it need to be discovered, and everybody who covered up, everyone who's participated in the cover-up needs to be prosecuted and convicted for attempted covering up of a murder. That is a crime. It's got to come out. We've got to reform this country. But look at Trump and his cabinet. The contrast couldn't be more blatant and more dramatic. There is Trump in the cabinet room surrounded by the smartest, the brightest, the best people in America, all successful in their own right, all experts in their own field, working together for you and for me and every living American. This is no longer partisan. This is no longer Republican versus Democrat. This is not liberal versus conservative. This is not Christian versus Jewish versus atheist. This is Americans coming together to bring reform to our country and restore morality and values and ethics and honor and the moral authority to lead the world. That's what this is about. And that's exactly what Elon Musk is trying to do. So, you know, the media, they are the enemy of the people. Present company excluded, I hasten to add. The media are the enemy of the people today. The mainstream media that every single day wake up and lie to you and twist and subvert and pivot. They are going after Elon Musk. And here is how Trump defended him.
President Trump put out a Truth Social today saying that everybody in the cabinet was happy with you. I just wondered if you had heard otherwise, and if you had heard anything about members of the cabinet who weren't happy with the way things were going, and if so, what are you doing to address those any dissatisfaction?
Elon, let the cabinet speak just for a second. Is anybody unhappy with Elon? If you are, we'll throw them out of here. Is anybody unhappy? We have a lot of respect for Elon and that he's doing this, and some disagree a little bit, but I will tell you, for the most part, I think everyone's not only happy, they're thrilled.
I couldn't be more thrilled. I celebrate what he's doing. And frankly, folks, I'm paying a price. My second largest holding in the stock market is in Tesla, and it is getting beat to hell. Beat it. I don't care. This country, our future, our safety, our protection, our value system, everything that America stands for, our freedom of speech, our liberties, our freedoms are much more important to me than anything I own monetarily. So keep on beating it up, because that means that Musk is doing his job. Now look, nobody's perfect. There are going to be some bumps along the way. Okay, the alternative is to do nothing and continue to work to bankrupt this country. And that is the path that we are very rapidly have been going down on. But the greatest thing, I'm all about the border. I'm all about deporting the criminals. I'm all about restoring our First Amendment rights By the way, we have got a fabulous interview coming up on freedom of speech. It's not today, is it, Anthony? Are we playing it today? Yeah. With Liz Peek and a group called FIRE. They protect people's freedom of speech. Liz Peek is the contributor to Fox Business. And we had you want to stay tuned for that interview. I am very proud of it, not because of me, but because of them. They've done such a great job of articulating where freedom of speech stands, not in this country, but around the world today. And we're on the borderline of a crisis. But we've got the right team in place that are going to preserve our freedoms. What else did Trump run on? It was the border and inflation. Inflation, that is a key thing. But this last thing that Trump never talked about during the campaign, but he is now talking about, is like, it's my number one overarching goal. And that is to balance the budget. And I'm telling you, the way that they are going about it is nothing short of brilliant. One, we're going to eliminate the waste. That's what Musk is doing. The waste, the fraud, and the abuse. And these people get on television and they're talking about how Musk is unelected and that he's doing all this stuff off the books that he doesn't have the congressional authority to do. And they're just lying to you. Because it's not Musk that's doing it. It's Donald J. Trump that's doing it. Musk is but the messenger. He is going out and collecting the data, proving that there's fraud, proving there's waste, proving that there's abuse. He's taking it to the president, and the president's signing an order to get rid of it. It's not Elon Musk. It's a team. And it's every cabinet officer. They're all working on it together. Now you tell me, who is going to stand in the public square and advocate for fraud? Who is going to advocate for wasteful spending? Who is going to advocate for abuse? I can only think of two possible reasons. Well, there's a third. All right, I can think of three possible reasons. No, I can think of four. I'm going to stop thinking about what else I could think about. Let's break it down. One reason is that they're playing to their constituents. And I'll just tell you right now, all the racial strife we have in America, all the yin and yang, all the pushing and pulling, all the fighting and all the stuff, it's not about race. It's not about Republican. It's not about Democrat. It's not about the First Amendment, the Second Amendment. It's about you've worked, you've saved, you've invested, you're successful, and I want what you have. That's it. A black leader this week said there is not one living American today who is a victim of slavery, yet they're demanding reparations. It's a narrative to get what you've got. The USAID stuff is a way to take money from you and filter it back. There's the amount of graft and the amount of corruption that surrounded that is you can't estimate it in my belief. So that's what I think. I think that it could be, they're just playing to their base. They're trying to get votes by saying stuff that's not true, but that's going to fall on sympathetic ears. Or they don't want to stop the gravy train, which is where I really come down on it. Or they could be just dumb. They could just be stupid. They could just really believe in the Tooth Fairy and the Easter Bunny and think that this money comes down from the heavens and it just falls down and rains and it's not going to hurt anybody to just keep spending like drunken sailors. And so what, that we're up to $36 trillion in debt and that the interest on that debt is going to be the single largest line item in the federal budget in a couple of years, and that we're on the verge of getting our credit downgraded, which means we'll have to pay more interest, which means that the interest amounts will go up even more, and that the whole thing will collapse like a house of cards. It could be that they're just flat out stupid. The fourth possibility is that they're truly treasonous and want to see our country destroyed. So the fact of the matter is that there are 3 million government employees. There are another 7 million contractors. That's 10 million people. This federal government is like a cancer that has grown and it's gotten out of control, and it is invading every organ of our federal government's body. And Trump is surgically removing it, one step at a time, one giant step at a time, and he's going to fix it. So we get rid of the fraud, waste, and abuse. Easy. Who can argue against that? Second, we get rid of the inefficiencies. There's a lot of it. It's not a 4-year plan. It's a 8 or 12-year plan to gain back the efficiencies that have infected this system. You want to get a permit, you want to get a license, you want to get something, it has to go through so many layers and so many processes and so many different hoops that it's near impossible to get stuff done. Even Russia, the former Soviet Union, was known for its bureaucracy. We've surpassed them. Our bureaucracy has grown to a level that makes the former Soviet Union's bureaucracy look like child play. We put it on steroids. So you cut through the regulations, all the regulations, and Trump's been working on that through all these executive orders, but then nothing happens. So now they're putting in processes and procedures to ensure that bureaucrats do what the chief executive officer, the commander-in-chief, orders them to do. And by the way, his powers come from Article 2 of the Constitution. You cannot find bureaucrat in the Constitution. In fact, the Constitution is intentionally designed to prevent bureaucracy. And that's what we've come to learn. That's what we've got. We don't have democracy. We've got bureaucracy, just as Elon Musk has told us. And the party's coming to an end. And once we get rid of all the fraud, abuse, and waste, and we get rid of the inefficiencies, at the same time, we're going to work on parallel tracks, and we're going to find new-found revenue streams. And it is going to open a floodgate of money coming into our country. Now, it can flow one of two ways. Just envision like a dam, and envision that there's equal pressure on either side of the dam, but the dam can swing out, or it can swing in. John, what in the world are you talking about? A dam swinging out or swinging in? You must have lost your mind. What I'm talking about is tariffs. And here's how it works. You tariff us 25% on cars that we import into the United States, or that we export, rather. And we don't charge you tariffs on cars that you import to the United States, that are imported from your country. Well, guess what? Or maybe it's we tariff 10% and they're tariffing 25%. Trump's going to even the score. Here's where the water flows. The money is going to flow in. We're going to open the dam so it can flow in. And that's going to be tariff new-found revenue, because we're going to increase the tariff from 10 to 25%. Bingo! That's what's called parity. Tit for tat. It's an even, level playing field. Then meritocracy takes over. Then people will buy the better mousetrap. The market will decide, not on the basis of cost, but rather on the basis of superiority in product. Tell me, what is the matter with that? Now, it works the other way. They're charging they're tariffing our products 25%. We tariff them 10. And we say, okay, we're going to raise you 25%. And they say, no, you're not. We're going to lower ours to 10. Woof! The door just swung back the other way. And now we've got equal pressures on both sides of the dam. And the marketplace decides. That rewards innovation. And that's good. So, tariffs is the source of newfound revenue. Trump has created the external revenue department. And then, this new device that he has invented that I've never heard of is the EB-5 program.
Let me talk about what you were talking about there, the EB-5 program, which is gold green cards, $5 million that essentially gets you a pathway to citizenship. Explain, first of all, how that came to be.
So there's an EB-5 program that always had, if you invest in real estate or make a loan in America, you get a path to citizenship with a green card. And so the president had conversations over the weekend with his friend John Paulson, who came up and said, hey, why aren't we doing better with that? He called me, we talked about it, then I did work over the weekend on Monday, and on Tuesday at a press conference, the president comes out and gives the path, which says, imagine if we sell 1 million of them, that's $5 trillion, and that pays off our debt, drives down interest rates, and makes America amazing.
So the coverage of it, Trump gold card to offer rich foreigners route to U.S. citizenship for $5 million. Trump says U.S. can pay off $36 trillion debt by selling wealthy immigrants $5 million gold card visas. And then Politico took another take. Trump, I know some Russian oligarchs that are very nice people. What do you say to people who say,
oh, come on.
Yeah, no, not about that. Are they going to be vetted, first of all?
Of course. Deeply vetted, and we said that from the first minute go. These are vetted people. These are going to be great global citizens who are going to bring entrepreneurial spirit, capacity, and growth to America. If one of them comes in, think of the jobs they're going to bring with them, the businesses they're going to bring with them, and they're going to pay American taxes as well. So this is huge money for America.
And how many people are waiting in this line currently?
So there are 250,000 people waiting in line now. If they're willing to pay the $5 million, that's over $1 trillion. That comes directly to $1.25 trillion just for that line. And I think these people are going to come enormous ways because they know they can come into America and they can be in the greatest country on earth.
Can you say $1.25 trillion? So let's just say Musk can get rid of $1 trillion in fraud, waste, and abuse. And then maybe, I don't know, let's pick a number. I don't know, 250 billion, 500 billion, another trillion in inefficiencies that we fix. And then we bring in $1.25 trillion in newfound revenue through the EB-5 program. Ladies and gentlemen, we no longer have a budget deficit. We have a surplus. Let the golden age begin. Biden, Mayorkas, Wray, Cheadle, Rutrow brought us 7 million illegal aliens, 10,000 military age fit Chinese men, people from Libya, Lebanon, Iran, Afghanistan, Iraq, flooding over our southern border. I just read this morning or earlier this week that there was a seizure of millions of dollars of fentanyl, heroin, cocaine that was discovered and the people arrested, and it was a huge sting operation from which they arrested dozens of people and stopped the flow of all these narcotics and illegal drugs into our country. Biden and his crew let it in. We're sending it back. I've got to tell you, I've said it, I'll say it again, I'll continue to say it. The stuff that Biden did Trump doesn't say it, I'll say it for him. It was treasonous. He was on the take. He was taking money from our adversaries. Hunter was shaking them down. We heard the phone call that he made with a representative of the Chinese government saying, if you don't send the money, I'm sitting right here with my father. If we don't get it by 11 o'clock tonight, you'll have hell to pay. $3 million from the mayor of Moscow, money from Russian oligarchs, Porsche, diamonds, cash. I mean, come on. Which hill do you want to stand on? It's not Republican or Democrat, liberal or conservative, Christian or non-Christian. It's just none of that stuff. It's just right or wrong. Which side do you want to be on? Pick a side, but don't be stupid about it. And that's what we're seeing from CNN and MSNBC. Stupidity. And it's a clamor for ratings. And it's largely about money. They're trying to get the ratings and they can't get them in the mainstream. So they've just identified a pocket of lunatics that they're going after. And they just keep feeding this vitriol and this disinformation and creating false impressions and just ginning people up. And it's just downright wrong. How can you stand for that? How can you look yourself in the mirror and even think about it? So finally, folks, I had an interchange this week with a young lady who works for the AJC. And she wrote this article about Doge. And when I read it, it just sent me into another orbit. She said in her article, it's going to do wonders for Atlanta traffic. So if you work near downtown, pack an extra dose of patience before you head out. Now, what do you conclude from that? That because Doge has discovered that 94% of the federal workers don't even show up for work and they got to come back, that's somehow wrong? 3 major federal work sites are downtown, all a short way from the 5 Points MARTA station. Sam Nunn, Richard B. Russell, and the Martin Luther King Jr. Federal Building are clustered around Ted Turner and Forsyth Street, so you may see elevated foot traffic. And a reminder, there are more than 62,000 of them working in Metro Atlanta. Now, I'll tell you, I wrote this lady an email that I frankly was not proud of after I hit the send button, even though I waited the 24 hours before I sent it to cool off. And I still couldn't constrain myself. But I basically told her, I said, you're either mentally ill, you are delusional, or you don't love America, or you're intellectually dishonest. Well, I didn't think I'd ever hear from her. She ended up writing me, and we had a series of email exchanges, and I have to tell you that I was unduly harsh. I found out that this was a very nice person, and I felt bad about having responded as emotionally as I did. And I'm not going to tell you her name. You can go Google the article and you can find it. I should hold her accountable, but I did privately and one-on-one. And I think we made some progress. But even still, I gave her my list of things that I felt like Doge was accomplishing. And I put it in the context of a $36 trillion deficit and interest payments that were going to soon become the single largest line item of the federal budget, that would result in our credit rating being lowered and would result in our interest rates increasing, which would ever increase the likelihood that our country was going to go bankrupt. And our notes are held largely by our enemies, like China, and a lot of our allies too, like Japan and the European Common Market. But I'm telling you, we were in dire straits. We were in the midst of the train wreck. Had Donald Trump not intervened, we would, I think, if Kamala Harris had been elected, I think by now the die would probably have already been cast and we would have been headed straight for implosion. And I don't know that it wasn't intentional. So the message in that is fight, fight, fight. Don't quit fighting. These freedoms are not free. It requires us to be ever vigilant. So what I'm wanting to convey to you is that you have as much power as I do or anybody else to push back on this evilness. So when you see an article and you read it and you say, what a crock, take out your laptop, get the person's email. It's usually there. You can click on it and email them and push back on it. It doesn't take many letters like that before they'll start changing their tune. And that's what we see is happening now. Can you believe it? Mark Zuckerberg says they're changing their fact-checking model. The president of Apple, the CEO, Tim Cook, is investing $500 billion of new factories in the United States of America, and the tens of thousands of jobs that will come from that, and the regained tax revenue, the employment, all of that is going to snowball downhill in a very positive direction. We all play a role in it. So when you see garbage, push back on it. Just take out your laptop, write a little email, sugarcoat a little more than I did mine. But now you know what's happened? This young lady and I have developed a really nice relationship. So we've got a dialogue, a respectful dialogue that is taking place. And I hope to influence her, and I hope that she will educate and open my eyes to things that I might miss, even though I intentionally watch CNN and MSNBC most days, even in spite of the fact that I loathe it and I hate it. But to be fair, we have to be open intellectually to other people's thoughts and ideas. And that's what I've committed to this lady to do. But even still, she keeps telling me, well, we disagree on so much, but you make a good list. And I'm like, give me your list. She says it's too stressful to do it. That to make her list, it would be too stressful. So there's a one-way dialogue going on. And that's what I see in this microcosm, but I see on a grander scale. I've seen it repeatedly over and over and over again. One of the leftists will make their little dig. Oh, it'll cause too much traffic. It'll cause too much foot traffic. We shouldn't have Doge. Well, how simpleton. Come on, give me a break. Our country's at stake. Put up with some traffic. Put up with a helicopter hovering overhead. Put up with some traffic congestion when our president comes and goes, or 62,000 federal workers return to work in Atlanta. Deal with it, because it is our country and our freedoms that are at stake, and freedoms are not free, and that is the truth. I want you to stay tuned today. We next have an interview with Bob Corn-Revere. He is the chief counsel for an organization called FIRE, and they protect people's freedom of speech all across America. And Liz Peek, she's a contributor on Fox Business. She's one of my heroes. She's one of the smartest people alive. She is an author, a journalist, and a contributor to Fox News. She's been published in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, you name it, her name has appeared there. And their insights into the decline of freedom of speech, not just in this country, but all over the world, is very eye-opening. And I hope you'll stay tuned and stay with us to listen to it. And we're going to come to you like we do every Saturday on the John Fredericks Radio Network, 8 cities, 22 radio stations up and down the East Coast. We also come to you on CDM Media Press. They're on 13 digital platforms across the web, and they are in search of the truth. just like we are. And we also come to you via live streams on Getter, Rumble, and YouTube Live. You can go there and watch us right now and join us on the live stream. You can also interact with us on Getter. We have over 6,000 people. I had over 6,000 just on that one live stream last week. We estimate that there are between 200,000 and 300,000 people on the radio, and then probably another combined 20,000 over our live stream and social media. That's the smallest segment of our outreach, but that's growing. And I hope that you'll do me a teensy tiny little favor and just go to one of those sites, find John Gordon Truth, and click on the subscribe button. Like us if you do. And if you think it bears repeating, just hit that share button. Each time you do one of those things, it moves us up on the algorithm. We can get a better reach, and we can get even bigger and better guests. Not that we don't have phenomenal guests already. Let's get right to it with Liz Peek and Bob Corn-Revere right now. It is my pleasure to welcome to The Truth now Liz Peek. She is a Fox Business regular contributor. She's on with Mornings with Maria. She's all over Fox News, and also is an author. She's written articles for the New York Post, the Wall Street Journal, and many other publications. And I am quick to add that she is my friend. Liz, welcome back to The Truth. It's so nice to have you.
Thank you. Thanks very much for having me.
We're also joined by Robert Corn-Revere. He is a partner in the Washington, D.C. office of Davis Wright Tremaine, LLP, specializing in freedom of expression and communications law. I guess I should say he was a partner there. He is now the general counsel or chief counsel for FIRE. They're a public interest 501c3 that works to defend your and my free speech. Robert, welcome.
Thanks, John. It's great to be here.
So, Liz, I watched President Trump signing executive orders the other day, and he signed an executive order saying that men could not compete in women's sports. And while he was doing it, he just sort of shook his head and said, I can't even believe we're talking about this stuff. And that's the way I feel about free speech. Why are we even talking about this? My entire life, the rule has been that you can say whatever you want to whomever you want, wherever you want, as long as you do not use language that could put other people in danger, like saying fire in a crowded theater. How have we lost our way?
Well, I think that's a really good question. As someone on the right side of the political aisle, I would point out that during Joe Biden's administration, we had the government actually actively suppressing dissenting points of view about, for example, how to treat COVID. That was probably the first instance, a really glaring instance of where the government was leaning on social media companies to deplatform doctors, even eminent doctors, who didn't agree with the advice that was coming down from the NIH and the CDC in our country about where COVID came from and how to treat it, what kinds of medicines you might explore, et cetera. And when you consider that this was a brand new virus that was killing hundreds of thousands of Americans, and it had, and you would have thought that the scientific community would have welcomed experimentation, exploration, all kinds of ideas about what to do. And in fact, in the aftermath, it turns out a lot of those doctors were right, that medicines like ivermectin actually had a use in helping people get over COVID. So that was maybe, I think, for a lot of people, the first instance where we all looked at the government and said, oh my gosh, they really are leaning on people. And of course, we didn't know that until Elon Musk bought Twitter and exposed the Twitter files, which really brought home just how egregious the government's behavior had been. Fast forward, you had Joe Biden during his term as presidency didn't try to put in place, he actually did put in place a government agency that was meant to cut down on disinformation. And even though that caused such a ruckus because it was so clearly an Orwellian statement about the government's intent of ferreting out, again, opinions that they didn't approve of, the and it was shut down almost immediately. Nonetheless, I think all of us kind of came to be on guard when Hillary Clinton and Al Gore and various other people would talk about disinformation being a real problem, and that this was something we had to fight against. Okay, there's a lot of indeed bad ideas on Twitter and on Facebook and Instagram. In fact, there is misinformation, but the real question, John, now and always, is who is making that determination. And so I would just tell you, I went to a luncheon for Jonathan Turley, the law professor from George Washington University, and Jonathan has written a book about free speech. And he said that there were 6, and I've checked this out, it's true, 6 major academic books out on freedom of speech. His is the only one that defends it. The other 5 find legal reason why we should abandon freedom of speech in our Constitution or as a right to be expected by Americans, which I think is chilling. Anyway, I'll stop there.
No,
that go on and on.
That is a perfect setup, and it's a good lead-in for my paradigm. And you know, if you consider, I was thinking about this when we were sitting in the luncheon the other day with the CEO of FIRE, and Robert, I want you to tell us about FIRE, what it stands for, and what you all do. But as I was sitting there listening, the thought occurred to me that if oxygen is essential for life, and I almost thought, like, is there anybody in this room who doesn't like oxygen? And you want to be free, it seems to me that freedom of speech is the oxygen for our freedom. And without free speech, there is no oxygen, there is no freedom. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely, John. And that is the very principle that FIRE is based on. FIRE stands for the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. We've been doing this for 25 years, although I left private practice and joined FIRE full-time just a little over a year and a half ago. But I've been litigating First Amendment cases for 40 years. I have basically devoted my professional life to defending this, and not just the law of free expression. What we try and stand for here is a much broader concept, and that is a culture of free expression. The law and the constitutional guarantees embodied in the First Amendment are really just the legal floor for what free speech should be permitted. But the culture of free expression is something that individuals carry with them, and that's to welcome the interchange of ideas. Ideas you disagree with, you should welcome those to sharpen your own thinking. And that's true not just for the way we live our lives, but also the way in which our government operates. I think Liz was asking all of the right questions, although let me just take this opportunity, since she mentioned Jonathan Turley and his book, and that it was the only one out there defending free speech. I'll use this as a chance to plug my own book, The Mind of the Censor and the Eye of the Beholder, the First Amendment and the Censor's Dilemma. It is another example of where we try and go through the history of free speech and talk about various ways in which government has suppressed it. And I agree with the points that Liz was making earlier, too, about how administrations have been trying to lean on private actors and try and get them to suppress speech, and in particular social media companies. But I would go further and say that this isn't just something from one side of the aisle or the other. FIRE is an expressly nonpartisan organization, and we filed an amicus brief in the Supreme Court in opposition to the Biden administration's effort to regulate social media. But at the same time, various states were trying to regulate social media companies as well. Florida and Texas passed laws to regulate how social media companies moderate their platforms because it didn't like the choices they were making. And in my way of thinking, the First Amendment bars either of those activities, either the jawboning by the federal government or the direct regulation by state governments.
Well, the thing that surprises me is that you said that you've devoted a lifetime to this and spanning several decades. Has free speech always been on the chopping block? Have we always had to fight for it?
Oh, we've always had to fight for it. And what a lot of people don't realize is that it is really a fairly modern concept, even though it goes back to the founding of our nation and the adoption of the First Amendment. One of the first things that the founding fathers did when John Adams was president was pass the Alien and Sedition Acts. And the Sedition Act made it a crime to criticize the government or the president and bring them into disrepute and make false reports. And that was allowed to lapse under its own terms. And when Thomas Jefferson became president, they pardoned everyone who had been convicted under it and remitted all the fines. And he said that this was as palpably unconstitutional as if we had been ordered to fall down and worship a golden image. And so that was really the beginning of how we understood the First Amendment. And then in the 20th century, courts began to develop First Amendment jurisprudence. But as you point out, John, we've always had to fight for it because politicians of all stripes try and restrict speech they find inconvenient.
Liz, the other thing that perplexes me, that in order for someone to limit another person's free speech, doesn't it necessarily run the risk of then backfiring and erode that censors free speech at a later time? I mean, it just seems to become one big vicious circle that if you're going to limit my speech, I'm going to look for an opportunity to cut you off. So how does that play out?
Well, I think that's exactly right. That is the risk. I think it's, and yes, it is totally a bipartisan, good for FIRE, for being a nonpartisan organization. And there are certainly, basically infringements that have come from the right as well as the left. I certainly think that's true. I do think that right now we're having an interesting conversation because of what J.D. Vance did in Europe.
Yeah.
He called out Europe for abandoning free speech among other democratic norms and other democratic values. And what was interesting to me, to get back to your question sort of circuitously, was the shock that the Europeans registered that someone might have noticed that they've been passing laws all over the place that basically inhibit free speech. In other words, in Switzerland now, if you insult somebody online, you post a derogatory remark online, you can go to jail. And in fact, someone did go to jail last year for posting online that someone was a fat lesbian. Yeah. And someone said on Twitter, was it true? I don't know if it was true or not true, but if that was the standard here in the U.S., my gosh, our jails would be overflowing because people insult each other all the time. So it isn't just Switzerland, it's also Germany, where if you, going back to the sedition law, if you insult a public official or criticize a public official, you can be fined for it. In Scotland, they have a new hate speech law. All these come under the heading of hate speech, and there are protected groups. But the problem is the number of groups has proliferated, so it's almost anybody now cannot be insulted or maligned or whatever. And you might say, well, gosh, I don't like to see that stuff on Twitter or Instagram. Of course, I don't think any one of us likes the fact that there is hate speech out there. There are people calling each other names and so forth. But again, it gets back to the issue, and to your point, John, who's making the rules? Who's deciding which groups are protected and what constitutes an insult and what kind of fine should be levied, et cetera? Because the minute you put yourself in that position, yes, you're going to be facing exactly the same kinds of penalties, retribution, et cetera, the next time there's a new group in charge. So better to adopt what FIRE has done and just say, we don't like any kind of abridgment other than putting people in harm's way, of course, in freedom of speech. And we are going to defend everyone's rights across the board, because that's how it should be.
Well, I think the policy in this country has for a long time been that words are to be devalued in terms of the severity of any consequences that come from it. I mean, just as a kid on the playground, the mantra was sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me. And that seemed to be, I mean, as simple as it is, kind of the policy that governed this country for so long. And somewhere along the line, we developed this hypersensitive attitude towards speech, and particularly a loss to me is the loss of humor. It used to be that Don Rickles would go on Johnny Carson, and by the end of the appearance, he would have insulted everybody in the audience. The benefit was that everybody was in the aisles laughing hysterically. So to me, I don't know any comedian today that is able to get away with not being PG other than perhaps Dave Chappelle. And what a loss for everybody who enjoys humor.
I would agree with you. And some of the favorite old time television shows like Frasier, if you watch Frasier reruns at this point, you're going to be shocked at the kinds of things that they actually had on air, none of which would be allowed now. And it is a shame because it was witty, it was clever. And, you know, Bob can really talk, I think, very ably, I'm sure. Greg Lukianoff, the head of FIRE, has written a book called The Coddling of the American Mind, talking about in colleges how we have come to the point where kids, to your point earlier, John, think that words can hurt them. Sticks and stones is an old-fashioned expression because now you get trigger warnings if something might raise your heart rate. This is not a joke. I mean, these kids take very seriously both silence is violence, the idea that, for example, after the murder of George Floyd, you weren't allowed to be neutral. You couldn't bow out of the conversation about race and violence and so forth. But also, they think that if you raise a contentious issue, that you might damage them in some way. Well, boy, talk about preparing a generation for failure and preparing a country soon to be run by that generation for serious problems. Because and an example that Greg uses, I think, Bob, correct me if I'm wrong, is, well, I will use an example from a law that was passed about colleges in California, where if you taught something as contentious or controversial as the teachings of Martin Luther King and wanted to engage your classroom in a conversation about that, that was considered very damaging to your students. Why? Not because he talked about race in such a kind of open-minded way, but because just that open-mindedness today is considered harmful and hurtful to Black people or whatever. I mean, honestly, it's gone so far, it really can kind of make your head spin, but it's something that has got to be reversed, and I don't know how it's going to be reversed.
Well, I did have the privilege of interviewing Secretary Wilbur Ross on this program a couple of months ago when he released his new book, Risk and Return in Business and in Life. And he said on the show that we have raised a generation of men in particular who are hypersensitive. And, you say anything the least bit critical to them, they just melt into a pile of rubble. Bob, Liz said, what do we do to turn this around?
Well, yeah, and I really appreciated the points that Liz made about FIRE and about Greg's book. And he had not just the first book, The Coddling of the American Mind, but then his follow-up book, The Canceling of the American Mind, which made many of the same points. And it really goes back to why FIRE was created in the first place in 1999. It was a reaction to the growing trend on college campuses of speech codes and trigger warnings, and what came later as trigger warnings. But they came around in the late 1980s, 89, early 90s, and it was a growing trend on college campuses, and FIRE was created. And at the time, we were called the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education. And for the first 23 years of our existence, that is what our bailiwick was. We focused on speech in higher education, and it led to all the things that Liz was talking about, where you create this hypersensitivity, this idea that words are violence and that the words have to be policed. And for many years, it was really confined to the campus setting, but we've seen this kind of consciousness, this kind of argument about restricting speech to be growing in society in general. And certainly, as J.D. Vance pointed out in his recent speech in Munich, certainly has affected laws in Europe. And so FIRE, as our mission was to deal with this on college campuses, as we saw this becoming more endemic in society in general, expanded our mission to cover not just free speech in higher education, but to free speech in society in general, in all of its manifestations as well. And so we are a much more broadly based organization now. So it was very welcome to hear the message that Vice President Vance delivered in Munich, saying that European countries had lost their way in the way they police regulation of speech. We've tried to prevent that from being embedded in American law as well, and we do it in various ways. And part of what we try and do is to say that we should not be fighting the culture wars through our institutions. It's not government's role to decide, to put its thumb on the scale and to decide which political argument is right and which political argument is wrong. That is what the First Amendment leaves to the people to decide.
You know, I'm sure that both of you have taken personality tests that companies typically give when you apply for a job. And I've taken those tests a number of times in different contexts. And every single test, I score the highest on collaboration. Now, I happen to think that collaboration is a wonderful thing. Even when two people are in violent disagreement, you can still get to a middle ground. Maybe it's neutral corners. Maybe it is actually, we find that we have more to agree to than disagree. But how in the heck are we ever going to do that if we can't talk?
It's a good question. And again, unfortunately, there is, as there has been less appreciation over time for freedom of speech, there's also less appreciation for debate. I keep thinking, you know, when this country right now, there are two groups of people. There are the group of people who, like me, watch Fox News and other right-leaning organizations. And then there are the groups that watch MSNBC and various left-leaning groups. And boy, they have a very different view of nearly everything. And occasionally that comes home really starkly when you're talking to somebody who you know is politically not aligned with yourself. And by the way, I live in New York, so that's a daily occurrence. You know, you'll say something. I remember we were at a dinner party, and it was a mixed dinner party, that is Democrats and Republicans. We weren't talking politics, but someone raised Kamala Harris's word salads. This is like 2 years ago. And half the people at the table were completely befuddled. They had no idea what we were talking about. Now, you know, it was impossible in that era to be a Republican and not know that Kamala Harris had this tendency to sort of issue 100-word gobbledygooks, which nobody could make heads or tails of. But the other side had never heard about it because it was never covered by the New York Times or MSNBC or whatever. I mean, I think that's a really bad thing, that there is not a single news organization. I prefer to think that I choose to think that Fox News, Bret Baier at 6 o'clock and so forth, really does bring in a lot of Democrats to speak, and they actually do have a pretty open forum. I'm sure Democrats might disagree with that, but it's really a shame that there is so much partisan news, information, et cetera, because the country is really not particularly drawn together by that, and not eager to debate because they see things only one way.
Well, on this show every Saturday at 12, from 12 to 2 on the John Fredericks Radio Network and on Getter, Rumble, X, and YouTube. We're also on the CDM Press Network on 13 digital platforms, and they seek the truth. We actually solicit people from the left to come on. I can't find any takers, and that's a real disappointing thing to me. So I've invented this character that I imitate, a Larry liberal who comes on the truth every now and then, and Larry and I will debate topics. And to my surprise, one day somebody came up and asked me, John, who is that crackpot Larry liberal?
Very funny.
Oh, well, so it illustrates the point that I was going to try and get to. And I'm not trying to be partisan, but I just can't help make the observation that I love to engage in political discourse. I mean, not because I'm trying to get my way or drive a point home, but I'm genuinely intellectually curious. I'm curious why other people don't seem to see that Kamala Harris speaks in word salads. I think it's a diversion so she doesn't have to tell you what she really thinks. But that's my own bias coming through, but I think I'm probably onto something.
Well, I think you are onto something. And, you know, it also reminds me, I got my start as a reporter, and I'm glad that I'm not doing that today. If I were a reporter today, I wouldn't want to have to cover any politician and try and make sense of what they're saying, because to me, it's all a question of evasion and political posturing. Uh, I, I, I have to agree that the real problem here is the polarization. And John, I couldn't agree with you more that people need to be intellectually curious and to seek out ideas that are not their own, people that disagree with them, to push them to sharpen their opinions. That's what we mean when we talk about a culture of free expression. I find people from both the left and the right guilty of gravitating to their own corners and not engaging with people from the other side.
Bob, tell
Totally.
tell us a little bit about FIRE exactly in terms of your methodologies. What do you do to try and foster free speech and help us protect our First Amendment?
Well, thank you for that question. And we try and do it in various ways. Our mission is not just to litigate First Amendment cases, and we certainly do that. We have a full litigation department where we take cases and defend people whose rights are being violated. But we also try and educate people about what free speech means, what the law of free speech is, but also about the broader question of the culture of free speech. We also are still, in spite of our expanded mission, we're still actively engaged in promoting free speech on college campuses and monitoring what's going on in that arena, but also in the world in general. We have a communications department that tries to stay engaged and to bring to light First Amendment violations when we see them, and also just to spread the word about both the law of free speech and the broader culture of free expression.
But you are unbiased and nonpartisan, and you've proven that, to me at least, in the case of Donald Trump versus Ann Selzer, where she issued a poll in Iowa just before the election saying that Kamala Harris would win by 3. I think Trump won by 6. So that was a 9-point deviation. Why are you defending Ann Selzer, or I guess, are you issuing a friend of the court brief, or are you actually a party to that case?
No, we are defending Ann Selzer. She is our client, and we're doing it because there's no such thing as a claim for fake news under the First Amendment. I mentioned earlier the Sedition Act, in which early in our history, the federal government tried to pass a law against false news. Well, that tradition is carried with us, and it has been strengthened through the 20th century and now into the 21st century. And what we see here now are the use of lawsuits to try and erode that tradition. When Harry Truman was predicted to have lost the election against Thomas Dewey, the Chicago Tribune blared a front page headline, "Dewey defeats Truman." Truman's response to that was to, at a whistle stop, hold up the newspaper with a big smile and say, "That ain't the way I heard it." Today, what we have, when you have a poll that got it wrong, is to have the president-elect and now the president filing a lawsuit saying that that is, quote, fake news. And that is completely inconsistent with our protections for free speech and our constitutional traditions. And to me, it doesn't matter which party, which direction it comes from. It is simply inconsistent with our tradition of free speech and free press.
So I'm going to ask you about some other cases. I want to ask you about Ann Selzer. The question I would want to ask you, but I'm not going to, because as an advocate, I don't think you can answer it, but maybe Liz can. What if it were proven that Ann Selzer was acting intentionally, knowingly, that the poll was wrong, it was flawed, or that it was constructed in a way to get a certain result because it was really her intent to influence the outcome of the election. Should there be any repercussions for that kind of devilment? And before you answer that one, let me give you a few more. And Bob, I'll let you weigh on these. Let's go to Liz first. But what about when the mainstream media has reported that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone? And I think we're about to learn that he didn't even pull the trigger. What about when the mainstream media says Donald Trump asserts election fraud without evidence? And they've maintained that for 4 years in the 2020 election, in spite of the fact that there is overwhelming evidence. I can speak to you about Georgia. I've worked on an election case there for 2.5 years. I've seen the evidence. I've cross-examined the forensic accountants. I've watched the videos of the ladies in the State Farm Tabulating Center taking the same stack of 100 ballots, feeding them through the tabulator multiple times, and 3,200 duplicate ballots on the Secretary of State's own website. And then I had the pleasure of having dinner with Rudy Giuliani last night. What they have done to that man for expressing his free speech and being an advocate for his client is the most despicable act I've ever seen in my lifetime. You're talking about America's mayor who led us through 9/11 and could look the mob in the eye in New York and cleaned up Times Square. And now they have stripped him of his bar license, his reputation, and many of his assets. Is there no remedy for that kind of misbehavior by a media gone mad?
Well, I think Bob can answer this legally, but it does seem to me that Trump has had some victories facing down, if you will, or confronting news organizations that have purposefully misrepresented things. And maybe that's, maybe he's been able to be victorious and win settlements on those because they know that with him being president, they kind of have to get along with him, or maybe he does actually have legal standing. I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. Going back to the Ann Seltzer thing, and I do think it's an interesting case. I know the fire people think it's slam dunk. Trump didn't win by 6 points in Iowa. I think it was 13 or 16. It was overwhelming.
I'm sure you're right.
And so it's almost. And I know Greg Lukianoff has said, look, Ann came out and apologized. I'm not surprised she did because it was egregiously wrong. And she had a reputation as really a very careful and good pollster. But also the fact that it came out right before the election, it sent a message. It sent a message that, gosh, Kamala Harris is doing much better than people think. If she could win Iowa, she could win the country. And that kind of thing can impact turnout and behavior. So I don't see it quite as black and white as fire does. But Bob, what about these other instances where the media clearly is, I mean, it seems to me every day they try to misrepresent things that Trump has done, although he certainly opens the door to some of it.
Well, I'll give you another current day example. I just read in the New York Times this week that Donald Trump asserts that Doge has found massive fraud, abuse, and waste.
But they have without
evidence.
Right?
It's the same refrain.
Yeah. I think about 10 of us opinion writers have written about that because it was such a completely ridiculous headline.
Yeah.
Anyway, Bob, what's your view?
And that is the remedy in a free society.
Yeah.
Writers correct what they see as misinformation. As John, you asked earlier in this session, how can you hand government the power to be the arbiter of the truth? That's something we don't do in a free society. And there's also, in addition to the idea of the government being the arbiter of truth, making these accusations through lawfare and trying to use civil actions to try and impose a penalty on someone who's saying something that you don't like. Liz, you mentioned the other settlements by large media companies, and it's something that we're watching closely as well. And the reason is because you now have a new administration with tremendous support and political power, being able to use the levers of government to leverage settlements that I don't think they would get if they had to play these things out in the legal proceedings. But if they can put the screws to large companies that stand to lose a lot more if they don't settle these cases, then you see this happening. But I can tell you that's not going to happen in the case against Ann Sulzer. There will not be a settlement because legally there is no case.
Well, maybe we just resolve that part of the price for free speech is that you have to put up with people who are going to distort, lie, or misrepresent.
Well, and that's why we're engaged in this dialogue.
Yeah, absolutely.
And contributes to the marketplace of ideas to let people decide.
And I am on a website that is for a hobby that I enjoy. And there is a section on this website that is called the hot section, where you can go and debate topics of the day, and it does get hot. But people have said, well, I think we should limit this. It's bad for the community. It's not consistent with why we're here. And I've said, look, just leave it there. If you don't want to go there, don't go into the hot section. But if you go there and you make a fool out of yourself or say something dumb, the rest of the people will condemn you, and that'll be your punishment. I think that might be the standard.
And that's kind of what social media is all about, right? I mean, if you go online on Twitter or Instagram or something and post something that is completely false, and boy, it does happen, and people find out almost immediately and come raining down on you with verbal brickbats. Not everyone has to do it. Not everyone wants to do it. It's pretty effective. And my guess is you don't do it again.
It's a fascinating conversation. I hope that it's one that we can continue. Bob Corn-Revere, I keep calling you the general counsel, but you are actually
chief counsel.
Chief counsel. And I may need you to represent me. My wife and I are building a new home in West Palm Beach, and she continually tries to limit my right to free speech. And I need some help.
Help you there, pal.
And Liz Peek, contributor on Fox Business and Fox News, and a wonderful author and opinion leader. Thank you so much, both of you, for coming on The Truth today.
Thank you so much for having us.
Liz Peek is a contributor on Fox Business, and she joins us now to talk about a snapshot of where our American economy is today. She's one of the most informed people I know. Liz, if you go onto the internet, you can read people that say that we're about to enter the golden age. Particularly, that's what our newly elected president is telling us. Yet there are other people who are saying that we are in dire straits and this economy is about to collapse. We've got relatively high unemployment, high interest rates, consumer confidence appears to be waning. Where do you think we are, and what is your 6-month, 12-month outlook on our economy today?
Well, the bullish case for the economy certainly is very dependent on number one, Congress getting its act together and passing the Trump tax cuts, which, as we all know, expire next year. Kamala Harris wanted those tax cuts to expire. That would have been about a $3 trillion tax hike next year, and that would have completely pillared the economy, John. So it's incredibly essential that Congress gets together, they get this bill passed. Trump recently has come out in favor of one big, beautiful bill as opposed to the two bills that the Senate was trying to get through. But the bullish case is you do extend those tax cuts, and that other tax cuts are included in that bill, such as lowering yet again the corporate tax rate so that our corporations are competitive with other developed countries. And also that there are no taxes on tips and various other things that Donald Trump campaigned on. I don't think those are particularly essential. I think what's really is essential is carrying through the 2017 tax cuts into next year. The other bullish aspect of a Donald Trump presidency, though, is the urge to deregulate. And I think it's very hard for people who don't run or own a business to know how damaging the tsunami of regulatory excess was that came out of the Biden White House. It's just exactly like what happened during Obama's presidency. Biden passed incredible numbers of rules and regulations about energy, trying to get the country moving away from fossil fuels, about labor. He was a very pro-union guy, and they passed all kinds of regulations about how the employer and the employee can interact, and it changed very much things like non-compete clauses. If you remember, they scrapped those. They were going to war against right-to-work states, or all kinds of things that, again, if you didn't operate a business or you weren't really involved in that, you might not be aware of it. But it was really difficult for corporate managers to kind of wade through all that stuff. The climate rules were awfully encumbering, and that became kind of a bigger and bigger issue as time went on. So, of course, Trump wants to take a meat axe to all those regulations that came about, and I think they have started to do that. I think that's incredibly powerful. Scott Bessent yesterday, being the Treasury Secretary, being interviewed by Brett Baird, talked about the animal spirits reviving, that small business owners and managers were feeling more upbeat. That's really important. People don't invest unless they're optimistic. And then, of course, the other thing that Donald Trump campaigned on was unleashing our energy production in this country. It is true that oil production reached an all-time high under Joe Biden. A lot of that came about because of drilling projects that were undertaken when Trump was president. But there's no question that U.S. oil production is going to start to head down very quickly unless new territories are opened up. And of course, that's what Trump wants to do in Alaska and elsewhere. So I think that is exciting. Even more exciting probably is the opportunity to continue to expand LNG exports. That's something that was paused under Biden, which was honestly, of all the things he did, probably one of the most foolish, because the only people benefiting from our pausing our LNG export growth was countries that we don't get along with, like Iran. It was just stupid. And you look back at that, it was just a sop to the the climate lobby, and it really was very antithetical to the best interests of the country. Anyway, all those things are going very well. What we have, though, is a problem, and the problem is $36 trillion plus in national debt. The government, the DOGE effort is real, I think. They're talking about already having brought down spending by about $50 billion. Democrats, incredibly, are resisting every step of the way. And I can't really think that Americans are anything but very happy to see our bloated, inefficient, overstuffed government brought to heel. And I say that with all due respect for those government employees who do a good job, but there are a lot who aren't coming into the office. There are a lot of people who are redundant. And I think it's fantastic that Elon Musk is tackling this. Actually, nothing makes me more positive than thinking we might get a grip on some of the excess spending that sort of characterizes our government right now.
I totally agree. And it's long overdue, because the spending that our country is engaged in has got to just be utter recklessness. Yeah. And it seems like the people that are pulling the strings are either very incompetent, or they're in on the take and don't want to cut off the money machine. I'm not sure. It may be a combination of the two. I personally have this belief that our federal government is absolutely corrupt to its core, and it is in bad need of reform. And I think the only way we're going to get it is for Kash Patel and Pam Bondi and the other warriors that Trump has assembled to get all the secrets out, give it to the American people, let us see what the truth is, and then deal with it after that. But I do want to ask you a question about DOGE and the deficit. And this is just a curiosity that I've had, and I'm sure that my fear is misplaced. But what's the first thing that our government does when we get in economic trouble? We start printing money, right?
Right.
And that's called stimulus.
Yeah.
Well, my question is, and what I've been trying to sort out, we've got a $2 trillion deficit right now. Would that not be a stimulus to our economy, as inflationary as it is? What happens when you just cut that off and there is no longer a deficit? Do we get deflation? Do we enter potentially a recession if the government just shuts off that spending all overnight?
Well, it's interesting to me you raise this because very few people have questioned that. And of course, you're completely right. If you're a Keynesian economist, and most people who look at the economy have some confidence that a big bloated stimulus spending like that $2 trillion deficit is something that props up growth. In fact, I've argued that the only reason that the Joe Biden economy did as well as it did for 4 years is because they spent at levels that we usually see during recessions or wars.
Right.
In other words, it was unconscionable, John, and yet Democrats went along with it because they, as we now know, they were ceding so many of their own pro-left agencies and activities that kept them in power. It was very, very, when you have trillions of dollars to spend, guess what? It turns out well for your side. So you're completely right. If you eliminated that $2 trillion a year, this is every year, deficit overnight, it would be recessionary. It would definitely slow our growth.
I think the only counter to that would be if you could actually reduce true spending and have a net reduction in government spending. And if that money could then be sent back to the taxpayers, then I think that would set our economy on fire like we've never seen it before, which essentially is what the Trump tax cuts did.
Well, and I
term.
would go a step further. What I actually was writing about before I spoke to you today is this very sort of out of left field idea that there should be a Doge dividend. They're talking about, and Elon Musk is investigating, it was not his idea, but he is on board with the idea that maybe 20% of the savings that the Doge team finds and can actually accomplish go back to shareholders. So if you actually save $2 trillion over the next couple of years, every family, every taxpayer would get a check for $5,000. Well, what's brilliant about that, several things. One is it just shuts up Democrats. I mean, if you have the whole country expecting to benefit money in the mail from this effort to cut government waste, everyone is going to be cheering on the Doge team, right? So that would be a huge public relations win. But the other thing is, indeed, as you cut down on government waste, that government waste is not productive money, but it is money that's out there, going to various people. Guess what? This $5,000 stimulus check, which is in effect what it would be an offset to some of that depressing effect of having less government spending. So is it a perfect match? No. But would it help? Yeah, I think it would. And boy, to your point, would it buoy the mood of America to say, you know what, these guys are saving us money as taxpayers and they're giving some of it back. I think it'd be awesome.
Well, and if the taxpayers get the money back, they're going to be putting it right back into the economy, and consumer confidence is going to soar, and the snowball starts rolling down the hill in a very positive direction. So I think it could be very exciting, and I think you make an excellent point. So next 180 days, interest rates up, down, sideways?
Well, I don't really see them coming down because I don't see inflation disappearing. Inflation ticked up a little bit in January. That doesn't worry me so much because January, that sort of typically always happens. But I don't see really any reason for prices to start coming down radically. And the Fed, I think, has sort of expressed its neutrality. I mean, I don't think they're in any race to cut rates. By the way, one of the Fed governors came out yesterday, said he didn't think that Trump's tariffs would have much impact on inflation. And that didn't, of course, get any notice whatsoever. But I think assuming that you're immediately going to see a price surge because of tariffs being implemented, I would be cautious about that. At this point, we don't know what it looks like. We don't know what the impact of various importers will be. But I'm hopeful that we don't see inflation go to 4 or 5% from currently 2.5 to 3. If it doesn't, there's no reason for interest rates to go up. but neither is there much reason for them to come down.
Yeah, I think sideways sounds like the answer. Liz Peek,
Yeah.
thank you so much. Liz is a regular contributor on Fox Business. I get the pleasure of watching her frequently because the Mornings with Maria show that she appears on is one of my absolute favorites. And Liz, you have had such a wonderful career and enjoy such a great prominent spot in our you are part of the mainstream media. You're just on the good side of it. So thank you so much for coming on The Truth. We welcome you back anytime.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me, John. I really appreciate it.
Our pleasure. Welcome to The Truth. I'm John Gordon. It has been another year in Trump speed. I can't wait to wake up every morning and see what happened overnight. And I'm glued to the television throughout the day because things are happening so rapidly. And President Trump in a month has gotten more done. Really, he's gotten more done in a week than Biden did in a year, in a positive way. When Biden was president, I dreaded turning on the news. I literally dreaded turning on the news. I was waiting for the next shoe to drop. But now I look forward to the news because there's so much positivity in the news. And I think the American people feel it. But we're on the hunt for the bureaucrats. There is a bounty out for every corrupt and bad bureaucrat in Washington. I'm ecstatic. I hope you are too. But look at some of the examples of the waste and abuse that Elon Musk has found. $1.5 million to advance DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, in Serbia's workplace and business communities. Now, I don't know. When I read that, I just wonder, do you think that money really was used for DEI in Serbia? I have my doubts. I bet you there's somebody sitting on the beach somewhere right now enjoying that $1.5 million. And then there was a $70,000 payment for the production of a DEI musical in Ireland. $2.5 million was spent for electric vehicles in Vietnam. $47,000 for a gender opera in Colombia. $32,000 for a transgender comic book in Peru. A $2 million expenditure for sex changes and LGBT activism in Guatemala. And finally, a $6 million line item for encouraging tourism in Egypt. Folks, these are just the ones we know about. We don't know what we don't know yet. And I promise you, it's only going to get worse. Now, that list, by the way, is courtesy of the All In podcast. And I appreciate the work that they are doing and many other podcasters around the country that are covering all of Doge and everything that Trump and Musk are doing. But when I think about the fact that I have worked since I was 10 and 12 years old, and that I have paid taxes, and that I have saved, I mean, I've really saved. If you don't believe it, just ask my wife and children. They'll tell you. And to see people that are willing to just write checks, I don't know where they get the authority to do this or how they've done it. If the Congress of the United States approved $70,000 for the production of a DEI musical in Ireland, or $47,000 for a transgender opera in Colombia, or $2 million for sex changes and LGBT activism in Guatemala, every single one who voted for those things should be removed from Congress immediately. It is beyond outrageous. I suspect it's corrupt. We can't prove that yet. I can't prove it. Now, Elon Musk and Doge, follow the money, guys. Please follow the money. I've got my suspicions because, you know, when the reaction is greater than we would expect, it's almost like a red flag that something's not right. And the Democrats are going absolutely apoplectic over what Doge is doing. And are you really willing to stand for these ridiculous, wasteful expenditures? And they're not lawful expenditures. Who appointed these people? Who voted for these people? The bureaucrats that are writing these checks. It's like they've got their own little petty cash account, and they're just willy-nilly writing checks out of it to fund things that they believe in. How can you believe in it? How can you even believe in a DEI musical or a transgender opera? Well, I guess some people do because we saw it at the Olympics in France. But it feels like the whole world has lost its way in some respects. Certainly a large percentage of this country. Just check this out. Let's look at the Democrats' reaction to Doge.
We're winning in court. More than a dozen federal injunctions and temporary restraining orders have been issued against everything from their illegal seizure of computer data to their illegal attempt to ban birthright citizenship.
Number one, you know the Constitution. You know they can't just freeze these funds.
This Doge, I call the Department of Government Inefficiencies, is causing a reign of terror, chaos across the federal government.
I mean, are you really going to die on that hill? Have you really not figured out that President Donald J. Trump was elected president, and he has the power to hire people for the executive branch, and he has hired Elon Musk without pay, I would hasten to add, and they've got 100 people that are working that they've put on in Doge. And the nerve of them to say that they're working without authority. Who hired the bureaucrats that are wasting the money? Where do they get their authority from to violate our laws and just spend our money willy-nilly? I've said for 2 years, 2.5 years, that our federal government is rotten to its core. And if you didn't believe it then, I can't believe or accept that anyone with a brain and a conscience and any sense of integrity would not conclude that this federal government is absolutely rotten to its core. And that could mean corrupt. It could also mean incompetence. It could also mean just insubordinate to the laws and the Constitution. And then the protest. Have you seen the protest? They look vaguely familiar. Seems like we've seen this before.
I think the person who currently occupies the White House has no business being there and is making a chaotic mess of our country.
It's just ridiculous that these things are going unchecked.
Hey, hey, ho, ho, Elon Musk has got to go. Hey, hey, ho, ho, Elon Musk has got to go.
If you bought a mattress today, no judgment, but that is how thousands of our fellow Americans decided to spend their day today. It is what is being called the Not My President's Day protests. They are protesting in Portland, Oregon, in Vancouver, Washington, in Orlando, in Arizona, in Utah, in West Virginia, holding signs that say, "No kings, where law ends, tyranny begins." In Houston, chanting, "No one voted for Elon Musk." Organizers say the protests are in response to, quote, the anti-democratic and illegal actions of the Trump administration.
Illegal? Undemocratic? I'm sorry. 77 million votes? The American people have already spoken. They're tired of it. They're sick of it. And they're not stupid. They can see it. you can smell it. All the way from Washington, I can smell the rot. Well, President Trump and Elon Musk have developed quite the bromance. They went on Fox with Sean Hannity and sat for a very lengthy interview. And why wouldn't Donald Trump absolutely love Elon Musk? Why wouldn't any American love Elon Musk? Not only is he off the chart smart, but he has been so successful in every venture that he's done. But he also gave $250 million of his own money to help get President Trump elected. He also gave $45 billion with a B to buy Twitter, which was a cesspool of left-wing, radical, communist, socialist, pushing their narratives and agendas on the American people. And the American people didn't want it. They weren't buying it. And they were suppressing their own subscribers' free speech. If they didn't like what they were posting, they would just delete the post, or they would use the algorithm to suppress it, or they would just outright cancel people. And Musk said, rightfully, that can't be, that Twitter is a town hall for free speech. So he bought it, and he turned it back to the people. He also campaigned during the last month of the presidential race in Pennsylvania, which was perhaps the most important swing state. Trump won Pennsylvania along with the other swing states that nobody thought that he would do. And so Trump said, look, we've got our hands full in Washington. We've got a swamp that needs to be drained. He promised that he would do it during his first term. I don't think he really knew how to combat the swamp, because we've learned now that they are just downright evil. They are willing to kill people to get their way, like John Fitzgerald Kennedy, like Ashley Babbitt, a more modern day example, or Corey Compouture in Butler, Pennsylvania on July the 13th. I mean, I don't know about you folks, but these things really bother me. They really nag at my conscience that I'm part of a culture and a society and a country where this level of evil can be allowed to persist. And I think Trump realizes the magnitude of the threat. And so he found the smartest guy he could, who was committed to ethics and honor, to come and help fight the evil. And they're doing it. By gosh, they are doing it. They're making the American people aware of exactly what that means in terms of money. And now, mark my word, I'll get to it in just a minute, but he's assembled a team of warriors. So Musk and the president went on Hannity, and it was obvious that they have a very special friendship. Here's part of the interview, courtesy of Fox News.
You know, I think the way to think of me is like I'm a technologist, and I try to make technologies that improve the world and make life better. Your shirt. Yeah, and that's why I like my T-shirt says tech support, because I'm here to provide the president with technology support. And now that may seem like, well, is that a silly thing? But actually, it's a very important thing, because the president will make these executive orders, which are very sensible and good for the country, but then they don't get implemented. You know, so if you take for example, all the funding for the migrant hotels, the president issued an executive order where, hey, we need to stop taking taxpayer money and paying for luxury hotels for illegal immigrants, which makes no sense. Like, so obviously, people do not want their tax dollars going to fund high-end hotels for illegals. And yet they were still doing that, even as late as last week. And so, you know, we went in there and we're like, this is in violation of the presidential executive order. It needs to stop. So what we're doing here is one of the biggest functions of the DOGE team is just making sure that the presidential executive orders are actually carried out. And this is, I just want to point out, this is a very important thing because the president is the elected representative of the people. So he's representing the will of the people. And if the bureaucracy is fighting the will of the people and preventing the president from implementing what the people want, then what we live in is a bureaucracy and not a democracy.
How could you express it any better? I mean, that phrase for me just crystallizes everything that we're talking about. And if you've dealt with government, you know how lazy, incompetent, and yes, in many cases, corrupt they are. They're not there to serve you and to help you. At least has not been my experience. Now, there are notable exceptions. And when they occur, it's like Santa Claus has come to town because you're expecting. You've been conditioned to expect just the opposite. You've been conditioned to expect that you're not going to get a positive response, that you're not going to get a helpful person, that you're not going to get roadblocks. And when somebody removes those roadblocks and is actually helpful in government, you feel like it's a wonderful experience. That's what I remember this country used to be like. But somehow along the way, we've allowed gross incompetence to infest and infect our government at all levels. And that's what we're fighting. That's what we're fighting right now. We want democracy, not bureaucracy. And that's what we've got right now. Now, Elon is now Trump's best friend. I hope it remains. I hope the honeymoon can continue for 4 more years. But you know, there's multiple reasons that Trump is grateful to Musk. As we said, he's saving free speech. He helped get Trump elected. He put in a ton of money. And now he's devoting significant, huge amounts of time and has assembled this 100-person team of very bright young people who are computer experts to go out and sift data and find these nuggets that prove that the system is broken. You know, they're processing billions of payments every year. Forget the dollars. The sheer number of payments is virtually impossible to corral. There's no telling what is hidden, what is swept under the rug. But these young techno geniuses are writing programs to go through and look for all of this waste and abuse, and they're finding it. And so, of course, Trump loves that. And he loves the fact that Elon is using technology to trace and follow and track the implementation of President Trump's presidential orders. That's what the American people elected Trump to do. And Trump is enlisting the help of Elon Musk and scores of others to go out and get the facts and present them to the American people. Now, I'll tell you, there's one other reason that Trump really likes Elon right now. And you know what that is? They've moved the target. Instead of going after Trump, they're now going after Elon. Elon has taken the position of a lightning rod. And so all the fury is going to Elon and not Trump. So if I don't know if that's by design or if it's just happened. I think it's just happened organically. But if you're Trump, you've got to be loving this. So you see all this negative. Jamie Raskin saying that it's not democratic. You got to be kidding me. They have done undemocratic things. Now they're being ratted out for it, and they're saying that just the very fact that they're being exposed is somehow undemocratic. Now, riddle me how that works, because that's beyond my comprehension. And I think it's beyond the comprehension of the American people. And when are the Democrats going to learn that what they've been doing for the last 4 years has backfired at every turn. But thank you, Jesus, that they're continuing to dig their own grave. They're like the donkey that fell into the hole. And instead of waiting for someone to come and rescue it, he continues to dig. And the more he digs, the deeper the hole gets. And that's what's happening to the Democrats. So let's give them all the rope we got and let them dig their own grave and put the noose around their own necks politically, because that's exactly what's happening. Now, if I were a Democrat, I would be jumping on this bandwagon so fast it would make your head swim. You know, the Democrats have become the party of opposition. If you want to say that it's a beautiful day out today, they're going to say, no, it's cloudy and the rain's coming. It doesn't matter what you say. They're going to take the opposite side of that. So they lack genuineness. Only John Fetterman has started to speak in real terms. And, you know, we can disagree on policy, but we don't have to disagree on the time of day that it is or what the conditions are outside. But that's what they do. They just, and so if I were a Democrat, I would be saying I celebrate and congratulate our administration for ratting out waste and abuse and corruption. But I think that they're in on it. I think that they're on the take. I don't have proof of that. But when you look at the severity of the reaction and the illogical, the just gross illogical response, what conclusion can you draw? Maybe it could be just complete incompetence. It could be insanity. It could be graft and corruption. I don't know. I don't know what peg to put it in, and it may be combinations of all of the above. All I know is I cannot wait to wake up tomorrow to find out what Doge is discovered next. I predict that before this is over, they're going to track the money back. And I don't know how they're going to follow the money, but I think it's going to lead back to many people in our government. And I hope that there will be accountability. I really hope there will be accountability. If there are no consequences, there's no chance for this to change. Well, our vice president went to CPAC, which is currently going on in the nation's capital, and he gave an assessment of the president's and his administration, which includes, obviously, Vice President Vance. You know, when I say Vice President Vance, I pinch myself to think that we've got a former member of the military who has been well educated, who is an author, and just a really good guy. I mean, could a raging left-wing liberal not agree that J.D. Vance is just a really good guy? I think he's Trump without the sting. That's kind of the way I look at him. But he went to CPAC, and he evaluated the administration's first month. I mean, usually this stuff doesn't come out for 100 days. That's like 3 months and a little bit more. And we're talking about accomplishments in the first month. Here's what he had to say about the border.
But look, I think that what the president has tried to do is recognize that we have a historical mandate on a few issues. We have to secure the southern border, and thanks to his actions, border crossings are down well over 90%, and we're just getting started.
Okay, I just want to know, why has President Trump, he really did it in 2 weeks, how was he able to stop the border crossings at the southern border in 2 weeks with the powers that he currently has? To my knowledge, I'm not aware of any legislation that Congress has passed, yet Biden said, and Mayorkas. Do you remember that little one of the most disgusting public figures I've ever seen, Mayorkas. If he would rather lie than tell the truth, when the truth would have served him better. But he said they lack the authority to stop border crossings. All right, I interrupted the vice president. Oh, what? Who am I to interrupt the vice president? Watch the continuing dialogue here.
He recognizes that we have to really unlock the engine of American growth. We've got to get back to having a growing economy that creates good jobs and high wages for the American people. And a lot of that goes back to drill, baby, drill. We've done more on energy under President Trump's leadership than I think any administration in history, and that's not an exaggeration. And of course, we're going to do more.
I know you know this. My apologies again, Mr. Vice President. But energy is involved in virtually every single thing we do as living people. When we eat, the food has been processed, made using energy. When it is delivered, it is done so using energy. When it's packaged, it's done so using energy. When you pick it up, somehow that food gets from the grocery store to your home using energy. When this pen is made, the plastic is made using energy. I mean, just stop and think about every facet of our lives virtually relates to energy in some form. So if you can lower the cost of energy, you lower the cost of everything. So that is going to help tame inflation. It's brilliant. And Trump gets it. Vance gets it. And the team of warriors that he has put in place get it. All right, here's the last clip that we'll play from JD.
And then I think the third thing that he's tried to do, of course, with the help of Elon and all the great folks at Doge, is ask, what are we doing with all of the American taxpayers' money, and why are we wasting so much of it on garbage that the American people either aren't aware that we're spending it on or don't want to be spending it on in the first place? Right. Like, for example, the stuff that we've figured out, Mercedes, is unbelievable. Why are we spending money on progressive modern art projects centered around toilets in Afghanistan? That's actually something that your tax dollars were funding until very recently. And I think all of us are sitting around and asking, what the hell have we been doing with the American people's money for the last 4 years? Let's turn off the spigot and spend the American people's tax money on the American people's priority. And that's, of course, been a big focus of the administration, too.
And you know, earlier in this piece, we talked about how the Dems were going crazy and saying that it's undemocratic and all this stuff. Rand Paul's been telling us about this for however long he's been in the Senate, 12 years, I think. And his father, Ron Paul, was telling us before that for 20 years. And so this is nothing new. But everybody is getting on board. Now, those protesters that you saw in the first part of the segment that we just did on Doge, I meant to tell you, don't they look vaguely familiar to you? I mean, these are the same people or the same types of people that we saw in Portland and Atlanta and D.C. in 2020, 2019. It looks like they're back. Now, they may not be the identical same people, that they sure do resemble the same people. And I'm willing to bet, without evidence, that many of those people have been paid to go and protest. And if you look at the way that they've been organized and the supposed spontaneity of it, I'm not buying that these are organic protests, because who wants to waste your money? I mean, look, if you like spending the money on these projects, then just send it. Just send it. And I bet you some of them you could even claim a tax deduction for. So if you feel that passionately about it and you want to give your money to these causes, then just write a check. I don't think many people are going to do that because they know that it's a bunch of BS. They know that it's fraud. They know that it's waste. They know that it's somebody's personal little piggy bank that they're wasting money on. But here's the point that I've been building to. You know how smart these guys are? I'll tell you, they're talking about a Doge dividend. Think about it. They're going to give 20% of the money back that Doge finds.
There's even under consideration a new concept where we give 20% of the Doge savings to American citizens and 20% goes to paying down debt, because the numbers are incredible, Elon. So many billions of dollars, billions, hundreds of billions, and we're thinking about giving 20% back to the American citizens and 20% down to pay back debt and pay down debt, which is, if you look at value, if it were a real estate balance sheet, the debt is tiny, but we still want to pay it down. Doesn't matter.
So here's a point that I don't see anybody talking about. And it's a very important point, and I want you to pay attention to me now. So, you know all this debt that we're talking about? It's horrible, right? The interest on the money is going to outpace every other expenditure that the federal government makes. It has the potential to break our country fiscally. But there's something that a lot of people don't realize. It's debt. Debt comes from printing money when you're the central bank. Debt is stimulus. And that's what people are missing. And it's dangerous. I'm telling you, this Doge thing, as much as we like it, and taming the federal budget, as much as I love it, the last time we had a balanced budget was under Bill Clinton. We need to balance the budget. Mr. President, I really want you to balance the budget, but I can tell you, these guys are on a high wire act. And here's the rub. If you start cutting back on the federal deficit, if debt is stimulus for the economy, reducing debt is deflationary for the economy. I believe. I think. And I've got an interview we're going to put up here shortly with Liz Peek, who is a contributor at Fox Business. If you watch Mornings with Maria, you know who I'm talking about. She is one brilliant, incredibly smart lady. But I had this conversation with her in our interview. And I said, I'm the only person I've heard talking about this. And she agreed with me that when you start curtailing the deficits, you're going to, by definition, potentially deflate our economy. And that's dangerous. So they got to figure out how to do it. Well, what have they brilliantly come up with? They're going to give you like COVID money. Do you remember when those checks came in? The COVID money? Oh my gosh, happy day, free money. And these $5,000 checks that are going to go out to every living American is free. It's all free. And consumer confidence is going to spike, and consumer spending is going to spike. And that is how they are going to prop up the economy and not allow us to slip into a recession or worse. And I can tell you, folks, we are dancing on the top of a needle right now. This economy is so shaky, and we got a light at the end of the tunnel, and we don't know if it's sunshine or if it's a freight train. And there is great risk right now. I believe you got high interest rates, relatively high unemployment, right at about 4%. Trump had it down almost to 3%. Well, that's only 1%. Yeah, right. Well, that's a 25% reduction. And so a 33% increase, if you will. So, and you look at consumer spending, but that's not even the worst yet. All these commercial office spaces that are vacant, the leases are coming due, And people are not going to renew those leases, yet the landlords have got massive debt that they took on to finance those buildings. And where is the money going to come from to service that debt? Now, I can paint the most doom and gloom picture for you've ever seen. But Trump and Biden could never possibly have dealt with this, and his administration. They are incompetent personified. But these guys are smart, and they know what they're dealing with. And they know that, well, let's take $2 trillion out of the national budget and we won't have the debt, and you will wreck the American economy in a nanosecond, I believe. And I'm still developing this thought, and I'm still collecting data and information to better formulate it. But that's what I think is a very real possibility. And so they're going to have to grapple with this in some way. So one tool that they can use if the economy continues to get shaky is just drop interest rates. That's the simplest thing to do. Well, that's not so easy to do when you've got inflation at 3%. So that's why I say we're dancing on the head of a needle, and people smarter than I are going to work to figure this out. But this $5,000 Doge dividend is brilliant. For one thing, every single living American is going to be applauding Elon Musk and Donald Trump, because Donald Trump's going to sign the check. His signature is going to be on that treasury check that's going to show up in your mailbox. And Elon Musk is going to be the hero that he is. But we're also going to take that money and spend it or pay down consumer debt. Either way, it's going to be a very positive for the economy. And I think we're going to need more than 5,000. And I think you'll see dividends becoming a something that is not just a one-time deal. I mean, when COVID hit and those checks went out, it wasn't because they were playing Mr. Nice Guy. I mean, that's part of it. But they were worried about crashing the U.S. economy. I mean, how are you going to let people eat and sleep and breathe and buy clothes and food and medicine and gas if they can't work? So they had to do it out of necessity. And that has contributed to a lot of the debt that we've got, okay? Let's be real. And Trump did it and Biden did it, and both of them were justified and correct in doing it. But COVID's over with now. We got to get back to a normal baseline. And this we cannot continue to live on heroin. And that's what this deficit spending is. It is just pure heroin, and we're becoming addicted to it. We've got to wean ourselves off of it. And I think Doge is a way to do it. The Congress has to get their act together. They've got to get their fiscal house in order. But they know they can't just eliminate $2 trillion overnight and not crash this economy. So it's going to be a difficult, long, arduous task to get there. But we've got the right people. Kash Patel was appointed or confirmed as the Attorney General just at the end of this week. Hallelujah. And he is joined by Tulsi Gabbard, Kristi Noem, Pam Bondi, Doug Burgum, who is the Secretary of the Interior, Scott Bessent at the Treasury. These are people that are accomplished, and they're genius, and they're working for the American people. They could be making so much more money if they were in the private sector, but they're doing it because of their patriotism and their belief in the country. Biden's appointees, Mayorkas, the other guy we love to hate on, who was his other cabinet secretary that was a buffoon? I've got Christopher Wray stuck in my brain. Christopher Wray is not a buffoon. He is not a dumb person. I do think that he is inept, and I do think that he lost his way. Somewhere along the line, he lost his way. Was he co-opted? Was he corrupted? Was he compromised? I don't know. I know people who know him, and they liked him when he was in Atlanta at King and Spalding. He'll probably go back there, I would suspect. Maybe he already has. the reports I got, good guy. Knew him from Little League Baseball, where all their children played at Buckhead Baseball for our Atlanta listeners. But he lost his way. And Biden's cabinet just couldn't tell the truth. They just could not look the American people in the eye and tell the truth. And his Secretary of Defense went AWOL for 3 days. All right, I'm not going to rant. I'm going to move on. The real point I'm trying to make is that as bad as Biden's cabinet was, Trump's cabinet is the absolute 180-degree version of the Biden administration. These are smart, dedicated, patriotic people. And I finally got my wish. I don't know how I'm so clairvoyant. McCarthy, the Speaker of the House, gone. McDaniel, the former chair of the RNC, gone. I told you, we need to get rid of the 3 M's. McCarthy, McDaniel, and McConnell. Mitch McConnell announced that he is not seeking re-election in, 2026. And I wonder why. I wonder why he's not seeking re-election. Because he would get his ass kicked. That's why. He has used up all the political capital he's got. He is a has-been. He is out of here. But the Blaze warns that while he may be on his way out, he is not without political power, and he is going to continue to try and sabotage Donald Trump every chance he gets, and the American people cannot stand for it, and the people that are enabling him, that would be the senators in the United States Senate, can no longer enable Mitch McConnell. Give him a fitting farewell, but this is the end of his reign. He is emblematic to me of people in Washington. He knows that people in his district do not approve of the things that he has sanctioned and the things that he has done. He tried to block virtually every single one of Trump's nominees. Kash Patel, Tulsi Gabbard, Kristi Noem, and Pam Bondi. He did everything he could to block their nominations. And every time he started to make headway, the people that he had to enlist to try and help him undermine President Trump caved. But McConnell, knowing that he's on his way out, isn't going to have any more elections, is willing to die on the Hill. Yeah, literally. Capitol Hill. His political career, is going to die on that hill. And the hill that he is dying on is the hill of rhinos. And it's a new day in America, and it's a new day in the United States Congress. And rhinos beware, because we're coming after you. And that is the truth. And I'm John Gordon.